Fantrax Fantasy Football starts of the week for Week 8. Jared Goff faces the Raiders on Monday Night Football, who aren't necessarily the best fantasy matchup, but this guy has had some great fantasy weeks this season. In Week 2, he was the quarterback 6. In Week 5, he was the quarterback 4. And then in Week 6, he was the quarterback 4 again. The upside is through the air. He's had 2 weeks over 300 passing yards. He's had 2 weeks of 3 passing touchdowns. And Goff is well connected in his system with Amon-Ra St. Brown, rookie Sam Laporta, and now Jameson Williams is getting more involved. I like him on Monday night. Breece Hall faces the Giants, who allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs and the 7th most rushing yards per game this season. Week 5 was the big turning point for Breece Hall when it came to usage, production, and fantasy scoring. In Week 5, Hall rushed the ball 22 times for a season-high 177 yards and a touchdown. He caught 3 passes, scored 28.4 fantasy points. Week 6, Hall continued his production. He rushed the ball 12 times for 39 yards and a touchdown. He also caught a season-high stat line, 5 catches for 54 yards. He's been the running back 3 and then the running back 4 in his last 2 games played. He's also played 52% of the snaps and 66% of the snaps in those games, which was a solid turning point because he was playing under 50% of the snaps in the games prior. A bye week's rest, I like Breece Hall to continue rolling. Isaiah Pacheco draws the Broncos again, who allow the most fantasy points per game to running backs this season and the most rushing yards per game. Week 6 against the Broncos, Pacheco rushed 16 times for 62 yards and caught a season-high 6 passes for 36 yards. Pacheco has scored 15-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games, leading the Chiefs' backfield. He has a safe floor in one of the NFL's best offenses, and if he finds the end zone, it's going to be a big week for Pacheco. George Pickens draws the Jaguars, who allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers and the 2nd most passing yards per game this season. It's a great matchup, and this is the case of ride the hot hand. 6 catches on 10 targets for 130 receiving yards and a touchdown for 26.6 fantasy points in Week 6. Then in Week 7, with Deontay Johnson back in action, Pickens caught 5 of his 8 targets for 107 receiving yards and 15.7 fantasy points. 3 games over 100 receiving yards this season. Pickens is a great upside play for Week 8. Christian Watson draws the Vikings, who allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. Watson returned back to action in Week 4 and has scored double-digit fantasy points in 2 of the 3 games he's played, but he has yet to have his splash week, and it's coming this week. Encouraging signs are the 91 receiving yards on just 3 catches in Week 5, 12 targets across his last 2 games, and playing 84% and 88% of the snaps in those last 2 games. We know as a rookie last season, he finished with over 100 receiving yards 3 times and scored 7 touchdowns during the span of weeks 10 through 13. He has the upside, he has the positive signs, the big game is coming, and that big game is Week 8. Terry McLaurin faces the Eagles, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. McLaurin has earned quality targets from Sam Howell across the last 4 weeks with games of 10, 11, and 9 targets during that span. McLaurin, during this span, has also finished with 86, 81, and 90 receiving yards. The Commanders' offense is going to have to keep up with the Eagles' offense, so I'm projecting Scary Terry this week, right before Halloween, to earn double-digit targets and go for over 80 receiving yards in this one. Rookie Zay Flowers faces the Cardinals, who allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers and the 10th most passing yards per game this season. Zay Flowers paces the Ravens in targets this season so far. He has 14 more than Mark Andrews, who did miss a week, but it's impressive he's drawing pretty consistent volume. 3 weeks specifically of double-digit targets, 3 weeks of over 70 receiving yards, 4 weeks of 14-plus yards per catch, and 2 weeks of 17-ish fantasy points has been really great for the rookie. Multiple positive signs this season, a great matchup, Zay Flowers in your lineup. I know the quarterback situation is up for grabs right now for the 49ers. Brock Purdy entered the concussion protocol, so it might be Sam Darnold, but I don't think he is the downgrade you really think he is. I like George Kittle this week against the Bengals, who allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season. Deebo Samuel is going to miss another week, which should mean more consistent volume for Kittle. Kittle earned 7 targets last week. He caught 5 of them for 78 receiving yards. Kittle has also finished 3 games with receiving yard lines of 90, 67, and 78, so he has that upside. Also scored 3 touchdowns in Week 5. He can do that on any given game. So regardless of who the quarterback is, I like George Kittle against the Bengals this week. Follow the Fantrax socials for consistent fantasy football content to help you guys win.